Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're getting into an idea that's really foundational, maybe even a bit challenging for some folks.
Oh, definitely. It's a perspective shift for sure.
Yeah, it's a concept that might just, fundamentally reshape how you view life itself, your own place in it, all of that.
We're basically asking a question that sounds simple but isn't. Who really calls the shots here on Earth?
Right. Is it us, with our big cities and technology?
Or the classic apex predators, maybe lions? Or could it be the tiny stuff, bacteria?
And this is where today's source comes in. Is it something older, more subtle?
That's the angle. We're taking a deep dive into Richard Dawkins' book, The Selfish Gene. It's groundbreaking, yeah, and definitely provocative at times.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to pull out the core ideas, the main insights from the book. And it reveals something pretty surprising about our role in the grand scheme of evolution.
And crucially, we want to explore what this means for us. For human meaning, for purpose. How can we find maybe inspiration even in what seems like a cold, almost mechanical view of life?
Let's start with that core idea, that radical premise Dawkins throws out there right away.
He basically says, look, humans, we aren't the masters of the planet, not in the way we think.
Okay, so what are we then?
We are fundamentally survival machines.
Survival machines. That sounds pretty bleak, almost robotic. What does he actually mean by that? What are we surviving for?
He means we're these incredibly complex vessels, these vehicles, designed to carry, protect, and most importantly, pass on our genes.
Ah, okay. The genes.
Yeah. And I get it, that perspective can feel really impersonal at first. Like it strips away all our agency, our free will,
Right. It feels kind of cold.
It does, but stick with us because understanding this, really grappling with it, is actually key to finding a deeper kind of meaning later on.
Okay, so if we're just complex vehicles for genes, where did this whole setup even start? How did it all begin?
Dawkins takes us way, way back to the primordial Earth. Picture this kind of boring chemical soup.
Just basic stuff floating around.
Exactly. Water, ammonia, methane, carbon dioxide, just sort of there. No purpose, nothing exciting happening. Until, well, what Dawkins calls a lucky event. Imagine a huge energy surge, like lightning, zapping that soup.
Okay.
That spark sets off chemical reactions. Amino acids form, then proteins. Complex organic molecules start appearing. These are the very first building blocks, the absolute basement for life.
And then the really wild part happens, right? The self-replicating molecule.
Yeah, that's the kicker. He calls it Molecule A.
Mm-hmm.
By pure random chance, one of these molecules develops the ability to make copies of itself.
The odds of that must be astronomical, infinitesimally small.
They really are, and Dawkins uses this great analogy to explain it. Imagine trying to scrape together a random soccer team, just 11 people off the street,
Okay.
and then trying to beat, say, Manchester United with that team.
Right. Impossible odds. Zero chance today.
Practically zero, yeah.
Yeah.
But what if you played that game every single day for millions, maybe billions of years?
Eventually. Just by sheer luck. You'd probably win once.
Exactly. That's the idea. Life's origin was an incredibly rare, lucky event. But given the immense timescales we're talking about, the sheer cosmic time frame, it almost had to happen eventually.
Okay, I see. The luck becomes almost inevitable over enough time. But replication isn't always perfect, right? That's key too.
Absolutely crucial. Errors happen. Little glitches in the copying process. Molecule A makes a copy, but maybe it's slightly different molecule B.
Mutation.
Precisely.
Mm-hmm.
And then B copies itself. Maybe an error makes C and D and so on. These tiny errors are the engine.
Why are they so important?
Because they create diversity, different molecules with slightly different properties. And as soon as you have diversity, you get competition.
Competition for what? The building blocks? Survival.
Exactly. Which molecule is better at grabbing resources to replicate? Which one lasts longer before breaking down? This is the dawn of natural selection, an unconscious, relentless sorting process. No mind behind it, just physics and chemistry.
So these molecules, without any feelings or thoughts, just have this drive, this need to survive and copy themselves.
An imperative, yeah, built into their structure. And to protect themselves better, they started building defenses, little walls around themselves.
Which eventually became cells.
That's the idea. Those primitive walls evolved into the cell membranes we know today.
Wow. And then cells started grouping together.
Over millions and millions of years, yes. They clumped together, cooperated, formed more complex structures, multicellular life.
All for what purpose?
To better safeguard and transmit those precious replicating molecules, the genes inside.
So these incredibly complex structures, like us, dogs, trees,
Hmm.
are basically just elaborate containers.
From this perspective, yes. We are the culmination of billions of years of evolution refining these survival machines, all meticulously programmed by the genes inside to ensure their own survival and propagation.
And just a quick refresher maybe on the technical side, this programming is encoded in DNA, right?
Correct. DNA is like the master blueprint, the huge library. Genes are like specific instruction sentences or paragraphs within that library telling the cell what to do.
And this DNA is packed into chromosomes inside the cell nucleus.
Yep. And the actual code itself is made from just 4 chemical bases, A, T, C, and G. Adenine, thymine, cytosine, guanine. Their sequence is the language that builds and runs everything. It's an instruction manual, essentially.
It's an incredibly complex one.
Unbelievably complex. And these genetic instructions lead to what Dawkins calls evolutionarily stable strategies, or ESS. This is a really central concept in the book.
Okay, ESS, what does that mean?
It means these aren't conscious choices we're talking about, not like deciding what to eat. These are behaviors that have been programmed, meticulously refined by genes over millennia, purely because they help those genes survive and get passed on.
So like a rabbit running from a lion. It doesn't think, oh dear, a lion, I should run.
Exactly. Its genes have just coded for speed, for that immediate flight response. There was no advantage in hesitation. Generations of rabbits that hesitated didn't pass on their genes as effectively.
And the lion's genes code for chasing, for strength.
Right. It's like this deep, ingrained genetic dance, choreographed purely for survival, played out over and over.
And you see this kind of programming everywhere.
Absolutely everywhere in nature. Think about a pufferfish inflating. It doesn't decide to do that.
It just happens.
Its genes trigger that response. Or a hedgehog rolling into a spiky ball. Same thing.
Meerkats standing guard.
That too. Seems complex, maybe even altruistic, but from the gene's perspective, it's a programmed behavior that increases the survival chances of the group, which shares many of the same genes. The goal is always the same. Protect the genes, pass them on. Nature as this realm of incredibly sophisticated genetic programming.
Okay, now this is where it starts to feel, well, uncomfortable for many people, I think, when Dawkins applies this lens to human behavior, especially something like love.
Right. Let's take mother's love. We see it as noble, unconditional, maybe even divine.
Definitely. The ultimate selfless act.
But Dawkins offers a colder take, viewed through this gene-centric lens. He argues that even maternal love is, at its core, a behavior programmed to ensure gene survival.
How so? Give me an example.
Well, think about a mother instinctively massaging her baby's legs. We see tenderness. But, biologically, stronger legs might increase the child's chances of escaping danger later, surviving to reproduce.
So it's like a genetic investment.
That's how it's framed, yeah. Honed by evolution. Not conscious calculation by the mother, of course, but a programmed drive.
Which leads to this idea of kin selection, right? Explaining why we feel differently towards relatives.
Exactly. Why this intense bond with our kids. They carry 50% of our genes, a nephew or niece, about 25%, a stranger, virtually none in comparison.
So the genes are essentially programmed to prioritize their own copies.
It sounds harsh, doesn't it? Brutal even. But Dawkins presents it as the stark, logical calculus of the selfish gene. Protect your closest genetic relatives most fiercely.
And this isn't just about humans, it's sort of genetic planning.
Not at all. Genes need to spread, sure, but resources are limited, so even unconscious organisms show strategies for this. He mentions an experiment with crickets.
Oh yeah, what did they find?
Female crickets lay fewer eggs if they hear lots of male crickets chirping nearby.
Why?
Because lots of chirping signals, lots of competition for food later on, fewer resources for her offspring. But if she hears only a few males, she lays more eggs.
Sensing abundance.
Right. It shows that even insects, even plants probably, have evolved these mechanisms to maximize the survival chances of their genes, not just the number produced. It's unconscious programming.
This also helps explain sibling rivalry, doesn't it? Parents sacrifice, but siblings often fight.
It does. Think about those baby birds in a nest, all screaming for food.
Yeah. Seems counterproductive sometimes. Attracts predators.
It does. But each chick is programmed to scream loudest to get the parent's attention, to get its share of the food. They're in direct competition for limited resources, each fighting for its own genetic future, even against its siblings.
And Dawkins gives some pretty tough examples here, right? Things that are hard to hear.
He does. He talks about things like infanticide in the animal world. A mother cat, for instance, might push weaker kittens away, essentially leaving them to die.
That sounds incredibly cruel.
From our perspective, absolutely. But from the selfish gene's perspective, it's framed as a cold investment strategy. Divert the limited milk and care to the stronger kittens who have a better chance of surviving and passing on those shared genes.
It really forces you to confront the biological underpinnings, even of things we see as dark.
It does. It's unsettling, but it's part of the argument.
Okay, so if it's all about selfish genes just looking out for themselves, how do you explain cooperation? Or, even more challenging, altruism. Acts where individuals seem to sacrifice themselves.
Yeah, that seems like a direct contradiction, doesn't it?
It really does.
But Dawkins argues these things also evolved because they ultimately benefit the genes. Cooperation often arises from mutually beneficial relationships.
Like the cleaner fish example.
Exactly. Big fish could easily eat those tiny cleaner fish that pick parasites off them. But they don't.
Why not?
Because getting rid of parasites increases the big fish's survival chances. And the cleaner fish gets a meal. It's a win-win, genetically speaking. So, cooperation evolves when both sets of genes benefit.
Okay, that makes sense for mutual benefit.
Yeah.
But what about pure sacrifice? Like a bee stinging an intruder and dying.
That's the extreme example. Again, the gene's eye view is key. That worker bee is sterile, usually. It can't pass on its genes directly.
Right.
But the queen, its sisters, the whole hive, they share a huge proportion of its genes. By sacrificing itself to protect the hive, the bee ensures the survival and replication of many, many copies of its genes residing in its relatives.
So it's not noble sacrifice in our sense, but a programmed strategy for collective gene survival.
That's the argument. Awe-inspiring, maybe, but also kind of eerie when you think about it purely genetically.
The book gives other examples too, right? To really hammer this home. The Red Queen's race.
Ah, yes. That's the idea that species have to keep evolving constantly, running as fast as they can, just to stay in the same place, ecologically speaking, just to survive against predators, parasites, competitors who are also evolving.
Like us in diseases.
Exactly. Think about malaria and humans. We evolve defenses, the parasite evolves ways around them. It's this constant brutal arms race. Malaria still kills hundreds of thousands of people every year, mostly children. It's a stark reminder of this relentless, high-stakes genetic battle. Real-world, tragic consequences.
Grim. And the cuckoo? That's another one?
Oh, the cuckoo's deception. Yeah, that's a chilling one. Cuckoos lay eggs in other birds' nests.
It's tricking the host parents.
Yep. And often the cuckoo chick, once it hatches, instinctively pushes the host's own eggs or young chicks out of the nest.
Why? Just pure ruthlessness.
To get all the food, all the parental care. It's described as nature's cruelty programmed with chilling precision. The cuckoo's genes ensure their own survival by eliminating the competition, quite literally.
Wow. And then there are the ants. Army ants.
Ugh, the ants' sacrifice. That's almost the opposite end, extreme cooperation. You see army ants marching, millions of them. Some will literally use their own bodies to form bridges over gaps so the colony can grow.
Living bridges.
Yeah, or form walls to protect the queen. They don't think about it, they just do it. It's programmed collective survival. The individual ant is disposable.
But the colony, the shared genes, survives.
Exactly. It really highlights the power of shared genetic destiny over individual survival in some species.
Okay, we've gone through a lot here. And honestly, it feels pretty deterministic, like we're just puppets.
Yeah.
Right? Puppets of our genes, bound by biology.
It can definitely feel that way, especially after focusing on the animal examples and the raw mechanics.
And this feels like a really important but. This is where the deep dive takes a turn, doesn't it? Towards something more hopeful? Enlightening, even?
This is the crucial pivot. This is where Dawkins highlights what makes humans different. Fundamentally different.
How so?
This is where we move from just the cold logic of the gene to something else, something maybe like meaning.
Okay, I'm listening.
Unlike pretty much every other survival machine on the planet, humans have this unique, frankly astonishing capacity.
Which is?
We can choose to defy our genetic programming. We can actually rebel against our genes.
Rebel against our genes.
How? Think about people who choose celibacy, like monks, or historical figures like Mahatma Gandhi, who dedicated their lives to ideals, choosing not to focus on biological reproduction.
They're actively going against the primary genetic drive to replicate.
Precisely. That's a profound rebellion. You don't see animals making that kind of conscious choice against their core programming.
What allows us to do that? Is it just our big brains? Consciousness?
Consciousness plays a huge role, certainly. Yeah. But Dawkins introduces another key concept here. The meme.
Memes. like internet memes.
Well, the concept is related, but much broader. He coined the term. A meme is basically an idea, a belief, a behavior, a fashion, a tune, anything that spreads from person to person through imitation, teaching, culture, like a cultural gene.
So it replicates, but not through DNA.
Exactly. Think of Plato's philosophy spreading through his students, then through books for centuries, or a catchy song, or scientific theories, or religious beliefs. These are memes, spreading through minds and culture.
Ah, I see. So culture itself creates this other layer of evolution, running alongside genetic evolution.
That's the idea. And it highlights our unique power. Yes, we might be gene machines at our biological foundation, but we've built this whole other system, culture, ideas, values that allows us to potentially rebel against our creators, our genes.
We can choose to act against their purely selfish instructions.
We can. We can choose cooperation, altruism, justice, not because our genes directly benefit in that moment, but because our memes, our values, our ethics tell us to. It opens up the possibility of creating a world based on more than just biology.
That's a huge shift in perspective from the earlier part of the discussion.
It really is. It's the paradox. Our existence as these complex gene machines somehow gave rise to the very consciousness that allows us to transcend that mechanism, at least partially.
And thinking back to those darker examples, like infanticide, understanding the potential genetic logic behind such horrific practices in some historical contexts.
Yeah, it makes them seem, as Dawkins might put it, chillingly logical from a purely ruthless gene's eye view.
But knowing that, understanding that potential biological influence actually makes our ability to choose differently even more significant, right?
Absolutely. It highlights the profound importance of our capacity to rise above those base level programs, to choose compassion, ethics, morality, despite any potential underlying genetic whispers towards ruthlessness or pure self-interest. Our ability to transcend is what defines our humanity.
So, okay, let's try to tie this all together. What's the big takeaway for someone listening? We start as survival machines.
Intricately built, profoundly influenced by our genes' drive to replicate. Yes, but the human story absolutely does not end there. That's the critical point.
We have this unique ability to defy, to choose.
And even looking back at the genes, cooperation was a successful strategy, right? The cleaner fish, the ants. Collaboration worked, even for selfish genes.
So if genes can find success through collaboration,
imagine what we can achieve when we consciously, collectively choose to work together. Not just for basic survival, but for higher goals, for shared values, for creating a better world based on our chosen principles, not just our programmed instincts.
it reminds me a bit of some older ideas, actually.
Yeah.
Like Lao Tzu is saying, the soft overcomes the hard. Small, deliberate, cooperative choices can make a huge difference.
That's a great connection. Or even modern stuff, like in Atomic Habits. Tiny conscious choices, tiny shifts in behavior when compounded lead to massive change. It's about understanding the underlying drives, the genetic programming, perhaps.
And then consciously steering, making deliberate choices about how we want to act, what kind of world we want to build.
Exactly. So this deep dive, which started with what feels like a very cold, scientific, potentially bleak view of life.
Yeah, the survival machine stuff.
It actually leads us to a really powerful, maybe even, dare I say, spiritual message about human potential.
How so?
Our genes might be selfish, inherently driving towards their own replication, but we don't have to be defined solely by that. Our choices don't have to be selfish.
Our ability to choose otherwise. That's our power.
That's our unique human power, the capacity to choose, to defy biology when needed, to create art, culture, ethics, to cooperate on a massive scale, to love beyond just genetic relatedness. That's where true human meaning comes from.
So the final thought for everyone listening. In a world that often does feel driven by competition, by instinct, by division,
Right.
How do we choose to live?
Our genes might whisper those old, selfish imperatives. And it's good to be aware of them, perhaps. But the meaning we forge, the purpose we find, that comes from the conscious choices we make every day to build something better, something beyond just our biological blueprint.
That capacity for choice, that's the real source of meaning. A pretty powerful thought to end on.